Okay. Got it. Yes. So you see that this is being sent to a third party. Live streaming. One moment. Done redirecting. Accept all. Okay. Okay. And then this we will pause that window. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the YouTube live stream. I think we close that window. Back to the Zoom window. Here we go. And now we click on record. One moment. We're getting ready here. So let me.
We already have 95 people. That's good.
Welcome.
So we'll definitely exceed 100.
Welcome. Wonderful. And now we record on this computer. Okay, good evening. Welcome, everyone, boys and girls. We have come back to the fun. We're still pretending to be young. Ain't it amazing? So fractalu.com is now moving into, is it the 4th or the 5th year? And I'm so grateful that Tufan Guven from geometricmodels.org has stepped in to help coordinate so many things with us. Thank you, Tufan. Tufan is now the co-moderator here and will be making announcements. Tufan is also coordinating the assembly of the new piezofire.com, and Tufan is coordinating the print publishing of my new book and the new devices and educational toys at geometricmodels.com. And so with this first class this year, this is January 21, Sunday, 2024. And so we have a whole series of 4 months of every Sunday, 2 p.m. New York time, classes prepared for fractalu.com. Very exciting calendar. Check it out, fractalu.com. And we will be at 2 p.m. New York time for all the events, which is 8 p.m. here Paris time, except when the time zone skips around for daylight savings, and then it's 7 p.m. here. But we are nailed to 2 p.m. New York time every Sunday. And so tonight's conversation is on the deep science of Christ consciousness, Buddha mind, and enlightenment, the real serious electrical science of how to understand bliss and enlightenment in terms of traditional and non-traditional spiritual terms. But before we begin, we have a lovely slideshow prepared, and I think this will be fun, and we're inviting questions. Some questions during in the little typed chat, and live questions at the end, and more fun. But before we begin, we have some announcements. The major announcements, of course, are at fractalu.com, the upcoming calendar. You'll see that Jenny is there, the Lucid Dreaming events, and Dr. Ralph Otterpole, Regenerative Agriculture, and several lectures by Tufan, who's here, Geometric Models, and we will have Patrick Botti and the Biofeedback crew, and so it's looking like fun. But in terms of announcements, Tufan has a few. Those announcements include the new Planck scale, Planck caliper, Planck device, golden mean caliper, which we're enthused about because it teaches the principle behind today's lecture, which is implosive compression, and also the publication in print of my new book, planckfire.com. Tufan's going to show you with a few announcements and a quote. So Tufan, take it away if you would like.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. This is Tufan Güven, representative at geometricmodels.org, co-sponsor of the event. First of all, I am very happy to be collaborating in this event once again. This has been a celebration of 4 months of sacred geometry, science of consciousness, and charge collapse, an annual event. So we are very happy to be doing this again with you. So I have a couple of announcements before that starts. First of all, this record is being recorded and it's going to be published on YouTube. And if you have any questions, please drop them down to the chat box. I will note them and we will take a look at those questions at the end of the class today. And we also have the new Planck Fire book printed in hard copy. So if anyone wants to acquire the books, they can contact geometricmodels.org, or they can find the PDF link at planckfire.com, and there is the Kindle option on Amazon as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a couple of sentences from Dan's new book, which is about coincidence, a subject that fascinates me, something very intriguing, because I have always been, fascinated about the facts behind the coincidence, and then has really wrote the science of this in a very elaborate, in a very nice way. So he starts with the physics of spin and rotation, and connects it to the physics of charge collapse, and then ties it to the physics of coincidence. So he says about the coincidence part, in effect, we are reinventing the definition of time as well as gravity and consciousness using only the principles of charge rotation and charge collapse. This begs us to appropriately redefine the physics of coincidence. After we realize that time only names relative charge rotation rate, the ability for one orbit of rotation to couple and connect with another charge rotation is obviously the principle of capacitive charge coupling between rotations. So clearly, whatever enables charge to couple or phase lock between rotations would then be the only definition of coincidence. An example is like astrology or couples meeting on a train by coincidence because their daily rotations line up. The point is to see then why fractal charge rotations could enable more coincidences, because charge collapse would enable more rotations or coupling between rotations. This is something that I loved in the book. Just wanted to share that with you guys.
Thank you, Tufan. That's gorgeous. I just want to say, so we're saying that time is only a name for relative spin rate. And when those spin rates line up or embed, the charge that couples between embedded spin rates is the only physics of coincidence. So it's so fundamental to realize that time is only relative spin rate. It really reinvents the whole space-time continuum. So thank you, Tufan. It was cool. Cool.
Well, we are really lucky that we have a book that explains such deep concepts like mass, time, and coincidence. So thanks to Dan Winter, we are very thankful for that. So another announcement about our new tool, the Planck Tuner. This is my invention and my design based on Dan Winter's original formula about the universal frequency cascade. So this ruler, in addition to the usual function of measuring sacred proportions, the golden ratio, this also measures the exact phase conjugate dimensions. So you will see that we have added this small piece on the ruler, which shows some dimensions here. You will see that there are some lines, and each line is connected with a set of 3 numbers which correspond to the integer in the formula Planck length times the exponents of golden ratio here. So there's this n you see over phi, which is the integer. So that integer correlates to those 3 set of numbers. For example, when this line aligns with the second segment like this, this means that those 3 set of numbers corresponds to these segments here, the 3 segments, you see? For example, it says 161, 162, and 163. This means that this segment equals to Planck length times golden ratio over 161. So this is a new ruler that can help any artists, architects, or designers who wants to find the exact phase conjugate negentropic dimensions. So they can find this at geometricmodels.org. And what else? Well, we have. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I'm excited about that personally. I'm so Tufan put a huge amount of work in putting that together. So not only do you see the sacred ratio, but you see the point at which the scale invites charge collapse. The only actual definition of sacred space, sacred dimension is when charge implosion is possible. So you literally, it's a very powerful tool for creating sacred space. Cool, Tufan.
Thanks. This is the first ruler of its kind. Thanks to Dan. So these are pretty much it. We will go more into details in my lecture next week. But for the time being, I'll leave it to you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Tufan. Okay, so we're going to unclick the pin. And now I'm going to prepare the slideshow for my little talk here. I'm going to pin my screen. Here we go. Okay, am I looking younger? I think my blue eyes almost match my shirt, thanks to Valerie. So tonight's talk, which is the deep science of Christ consciousness, the Buddha mind, and enlightenment, takes a new look at ancient spiritual terminologies. Remember, you could say, well, since we have been saying that pure principle science behind spirituality eliminates the need for immature, childish, and disempowering personality worship and miracle worship, why are we talking about archetypes like the Christ mind? And we're going to talk about Buddha and the origin of the term Yahweh. When we want to discourage personality worship. And the way we are going to look at this is discover behind the shape and the principle of what's in the name is only and sustainably the pure principle behind the wave mechanics, principle of Christos, crystallization. So that centripetal force that enables crystallization. To put it in another way, we're going to say that when that compression happens, when humans have bliss experience, call it Kundalini, you feel that frozen vice-like grip, you feel that you're suddenly still and embedded into all of space. What's actually happening is at the point of compression, the centripetal center point of that compression, related exactly to PlanckFire.com, that Planck threshold, that perfect still point, you then become electrically centripetal, massively and broad spectrally centripetal. And at that centripetal still point of compression at the center, you couple or phase lock to the nodes of that longitudinal array, dreaming track, song line, collective unconscious. So effectively, during that compression experience, you get to not only inhabit the array, which is where the lucid dreaming happens, where the telepathy happens, where the earth grid happens, all the fun stuff happens there. But you get to become the centripetal force that holds that array together ultimately. So whoever's the most centripetal in the local array, there's a name in physics for the title of what that office is, which is Christos, the Christ, okay? You are the crystallizing principle of the centripetal force of what's holding that array together. And what that means in practice, in principle, is you get to steer the biggest tornadoes. I mean, you get to throw your weight around. I mean, you get leverage on the nodes of the array. Remember, you're inhabiting an array now. It's called the synapses in your cortex. However, when you lucid dream and when you die successfully, you also inhabit an array. It just happens to be bigger. And if the nodes of that array are very well organized, then you can lucid dream very coherently and you can die successfully. So the point is that what we're identifying with the Christ principle is in essence the principle who's become most massively centripetal in that array. It also means in practice that, for example, whatever is the electrical most major centripetal point of that array, the local Christos, principle of crystallization, needs to be the dominant centripetal force there. For example, Great Pyramid of Giza is the electrical center of gravity of the Nile River Delta, center of gravity of the continent of Africa, center of gravity of the planet Earth, et cetera. You have this fractal nodal center of maximum leverage on the array. So there's a war over these stargates, Uru, Asa, Elam, Jerusalem, because who gets to steer? It just happens that the local stargate, Jerusalem, is actually broken. So I think we should cancel the war myself. But the point is that when you understand the nature of what makes the array centripetal, you understand the nature of what controls it, which is the perfectly shareable wave of centripetal fractal force, which is called the Christ principle. So this is the kind of conversation we want to have tonight. And we have some fun slideshows about that. So the slideshows are going to start with how science can eliminate the need for personality worship and miracle worship, but also then a turning point in our understanding of all of our ideas of what is divine and what is spiritual and what of collective intelligence, communion of saints, collective unconscious. The starting point for all of that science understanding is actually, it needs to be understanding how one simple electric charge field, visualize Tufan 7-color donut, okay, a toroid charge field. When that charge field donut begins to implode, but recursively turn inside out, the compression at the center node creates a connection with the longitudinal array, the scalar, the longitudinal torsion field, and that implosion of that charge field domain recursively turning inside out, that is the beginning of all self-awareness, self-organization. When electric fields become self-aware, called non-destructive self-reentry, non-destructive compression. So once we see examples of charge field domains that suddenly became mindful, like you can talk to them, like ball lightning, famously responding to telepathy, it's toroidal, or the plasma domain emitted by a good, healthy Theraphi.net plasma field. Everyone agrees if it's in a good place, it becomes like the family pet puppy dog. It's self-aware. So it's a plasma field that suddenly you can talk to it. So once you begin to think about how local plasma fields of charge, become self-aware, then you can begin to think about interstellar plasma intelligences that are so smart, they're angelic. They have mind on an interstellar scale. But if you start simple and understand how one charge field becomes self-aware, you can communicate with it. There's an interactivity in the longitudinal nodal array because it hooked up to that embeddable field. It's the beginning of having a soul. So that process of how electric fields become self-aware in the beginning, Sefer Bereshit, in principle, we're going to see the slide, is the clue to electrically beginning to understand divine intelligence. How does that intelligence first become global? Songlines, dreaming tracks, the real principle of God and the divine in Aboriginals is very simple. It's those magnetic domains down those longitudinal nodes called dreaming tracks. That's God for them, ancestral memory. Well, that intelligence in that array that you can talk to is absolutely divine. And it's beautiful physics. Doesn't require miracle worship, no personality worship required. You don't need a name for God. No. What you need is an understanding of the pure principle in order to embed in it. And that understanding will allow to evolve past obsolete religions to a deeper understanding of first global and then interstellar intelligence. All the advanced extraterrestrial cultures, they spiritually believe in what we think of as divine or spiritual presence. Yes, spiritual presence, absolutely. We are talking about the physics of spiritual presence. But do we need to call it God? Relatively optional. But do we need to understand the principle? Absolutely. And so that's where our little talk this evening is going in terms of say you're going to say it and then say it and then say you said it. So then we're going to use examples of how this compression effect creates bliss and literally Christ consciousness. So that was the little intro. Now I need to do a share screen for first slide. Bear with me 1 minute here. Okay, keynote, Christ consciousness.key. There we go. Hopefully you're seeing my slideshow now. Oop. Move this down a little bit. Okay, so do you see, everybody see the first slide?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So, super. So this is the first talk, January 21, Fractal U, the physics of Christ consciousness, Buddha mind, and enlightenment. So what we're saying is we have been for many years pioneering the idea that serious science, electrical engineering for understanding spirituality and consciousness has many benefits. Spiritual growth becomes more beautiful and awe-inspiring. You know those people that think electric fields are dumb? They're wrong. Electric fields can become divine. I mean, look, if you believe in a unified field, then you have to admit that what you're calling divine is electric, because there ain't nothing else. So let's begin to come to grips with how electric fields become intelligent. It's basic. And we're going to leave behind the immature disempowerment of personality worship, miracle worship, and thus avoid religion wars, because pure principle is empowering and it is the definition of perfect agreement. So the distribution of the collective mind, collective unconscious, the communion of saints, and ancestor memory become teachable by pure principle. A fractal longitudinal EMF array of charge distribution. You can teach, embed, and learn the principles behind how you enter the collective unconsciousness and communion of saints, literally ancestor memory. It is the physics of perfected charge distribution, which is the fractal nature of a longitudinal EMF array, formerly called scalar or torsional. And fear of death and fear of birth are replaced by serious electrical planning to pass memory through death and birth. Example, the measurable longitudinal EMF physics of lucid dreaming, we're going to look at the frequency signature, predicts memory through death. If ever there was a keynote, a keyhole through death in physics, is to understand how when you get coherent longitudinally, not only can you lucid dream, but you will die well. Ooh, that's a pretty good invitation. That's a motivation. So we're going to start with slides about lucid dreaming physics. And I'm glad that Jenny is with us tonight. So Jenny helped me work on luciddreamteam.com and founded the lucid dreaming, dreaming yourself awake, I think is the title of one of Jenny's groups. And to really, not only do you wake up in the dream, not only do you share information and experience with other people in the dream, you gain inertia to lucid dream together, carrying Mother Nature's silver seed through a new home in the sun. And the inner skills to do it, well, I'm just getting there, actually. But Jenny is able to lead groups, and she is connected with others. And there's many Aboriginal women, many Aboriginal wisdoms about how lucid dreaming works. And Jenny has a lifetime of experience with Aboriginals. So that's the upcoming conference on lucid dreaming with Jenny. So, and by example, dreaming tracks, song lines, how the ancestors inhabit that array. Now, some examples, we're going to see slides now, of how the Olmec made ancestor phone calls. They used an obsidian black mirror, which we believe relates to the concept of a phase conjugate mirror, wherein the transverse EMF waves can couple with the coherent longitudinal. Literally, how you begin to see ancestors, because clairvoyance is an intro to the physics of coherent longitudinal interferometry, how to connect with the longitudinal component of the electromagnetic field. For example, when we teach kids how to make that golden ratio cascade in their brain waves, alpha to gamma, and their brain waves implode, repeatedly, the same kids who just learned that and learned then to see without their eyes, suddenly, it's very frequent, they begin reporting they start to see their ancestors. And their parents freak out. Oh my God. Because the physics of clairvoyance is specifically developing that kind of phase conjugate centripetal compression where you couple with the longitudinal array, and that's where the ancestor memory lives. They embed in that coherence. Other examples are John Dee's famous showstone for communicating with the Ophanic angels. We're going to see pictures. And also the high dielectric black mirror coating under Nostradamus's scrying water. So literally, seeing the past, future seeing, the phase conjugate mirror in physics is well known for time reversal. This is not new in physics, but Nostradamus using that principle, ooh, that could be interesting. So these are phase conjugate interface for ancestor communication, like the Olmec's black mirror. So like the longitudinal coherence physics of clairvoyance, these are the mechanisms to implode the superluminal longitudinal EMF array into the visible transverse EMF world. Note how far more useful and precise this measurable and actionable electric language for the spiritual reality of our world. Spiritual reality based on understanding coherent longitudinal interferometry, how to enter the array, is far more useful rather than the ridiculous woo-woo and not actionable or measurable words like other dimensional and otherworldly or the other side. All the woo-woos use those words very sincerely, but they don't mean anything until you look at the physics. Then suddenly you can understand exactly what we mean by clairvoyance. It's not just we're going to talk about this in terms of the next dimension, when recursive braiding in DNA implodes, makes centripetal the DNA, and couples with that longitudinal wave, specifically during the physics of Bliss. So instead of calling it going to the next dimension, which is an introduction, the pure principle is the superposed axes of spin successfully nested only by golden ratio, which is the only door to the next dimension. Remember, next dimension only means the next axis of superposed spin symmetry. And after the cube, you can never superpose another axis of spin without using golden ratio. Example, the way the cube embeds in a pentodeca, the Star Mother kit. So the next dimension is literally a name for superposed axes of spin rotation, nothing else. It just happens that when you can do that, that implosion, which that collapse enables, connects you with the nodes of the longitudinal array of a bigger and bigger array, the more you've superposed spins. And that's why we think, well, sixth and seventh dimension, these people are really big. Well, actually, it means the number of axes of spin symmetry superposed in their DNA, in their aura, in their glandular emotion. So that implosion connects you with a bigger and bigger array. So instead of just using very crude words like the next dimension, we can actually use spectrum analysis and talk about the principle and learn about how to get there. That implosion has to be done without heat, without resistance to charge collapse. Hint, fear is the mind killer. Fear is resistance to spin, you see. And it's spin that enables. So this kind of other dimensional language is almost as ridiculous, I had to say this, almost as ridiculous as biologists who say animals know how to act because of instinct, when for them the word instinct in that case is essentially a cover word to hide simple, complete ignorance. I have to admit that I was sitting there in biology class in the 10th grade, and every time the biology teacher said, "Oh, that's instinct," I realized he might have just as well said, "Oh, that means I'm stupid. I'm using the word instinct because, in fact, it tells you that I'm stupid because I don't have a clue what it is, but I have a word for my ignorance." Now, maybe that's a little hard on biologists, but now we know that birds navigate down the song lines because of longitudinal coherence, the same reason they sing at sunset, because that's a longitudinal moment. So we know a whole lot more about how birds navigate, and we do not need the word instinct because it's useless. Well, and then I have one more bone to pick, and then we'll carry on. But here's the next bone I need to pick. This is rather like physicists who use words like dark matter to hide the shocking fact that they have no clue to why objects fall to the ground, the cause of gravity. Dark matter is merely an incredibly stupid, inappropriate name for the fact that the current physics has no clue where the extra gravity comes from. Physicists observed that there's extra gravity in many places in the universe, and they did not know where it comes from because they don't know why objects fall to the ground, actually. So they came up with a name for that stupidity, and their name for that stupidity is dark matter. Well, all the while ignoring the elephant in the room. Golden ratio fractality, hint, planckfire.com, the cause of charge collapse, implosion, and gravity. Golden ratio spirals is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. Spirosolaris.ca. So if golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital patterns, hello, was ever there a smoking gun of what's stabilizing gravity and atmosphere? So anyway, I'm done. I'm going to get off my high horse now. So here, now we get to go to the fun pictures. So this is the obsidian mirror here and here of the black mirror that the Olmec used for ancestor phone calls, imitating a phase conjugate mirror. And here is I believe this is the show stone. Well, yes, this is the show stone of John Dee, which was actually, we believe, an Aztec ancient ancestral mirror. So if we're scrying, which is a phase conjugate mirror, do you see they're using a mechanism to couple with a longitudinal array? This is just some of the examples, spirosolaris.ca, backing up my statement that golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, and therefore a smoking gun of how gravity is stabilized and atmosphere, spirosolaris.ca. So take that, you dumb physicists. At least I'm enthused. So here's Kepler saying planetary orbitals are nested platonic solids. Hint, the Star Mother kit. Thank you, Tufan. and the reason Kepler was actually right that planetary orbital nesting is platonic solid nesting, because platonic solid nesting is how you make golden ratio, which is the dominant geometry of orbital mechanics. So Kepler had the right intuition. Next slides are about the science of lucid dreaming. So here's the university literature published of the harmonics, electrical harmonics, magnetic field harmonics, 25 and 40 hertz, which most trigger lucid dreaming. Now look, they're very close, reasonably close, 29, 47 hertz. But now we know that the Theraphi plasma field is famous for triggering lucid dreaming. Why does Theraphi trigger lucid dreaming? Because it's implosive phase conjugate field harmonics, and that centripetal force makes your aura implode and spit out longitudinal coherence, which is the media of longitudinal coherence, the only physics of gravity waves, if you believe Tom Bearden, but the longitudinal coherence is also the media of what you radiate in order to lucid dream successfully. So science knows that you can trigger lucid dreaming, and I say the principle behind that is the harmonic series of implosive compression. And so enabled lucid dreaming is demonstrably, measurably, the ability to propagate coherent longitudinal EMF from a phase conjugate field. In the case of Theraphi.net, it's a massive, broad spectral phase conjugate, implosive, big pine cones kissing noses plasma field, which is centripetal and triggering lucid dreaming. About 30% of people have some bliss experience. About 30% of people have some sharpening of vision. And the principle behind Theraphi is, and we apologize to the American Medical Association because they do not know what their logo is for, but actually where the two caduceus kiss noses at the Planck threshold, you have that implosion point, that sweet spot where phase conjugation enables longitudinal propagation. And an extreme example of this, if you take the same harmonic series, Schumann cascade, the alpha to beta golden ratio cascade. Here's alpha in green, gamma up top, and the harmonics there, the blue ones are golden ratio and the pink ones are octave. And you have octave and golden ratio cascade from alpha to gamma. And in the case of Jean-Charles Moyen here, massive coherence in the alpha here in green. He had to turn the gain down because it was huge. Just before He teleported with witnesses multiple times, came back from the beach with sand between his toes after teleporting. Hello. So that what happened is that this massive implosive compression, and we'll see about Ophanic and Stargates in a minute, but you get the principle that once you learn how to implode, you can do cool stuff. What else is fun, actually? I think everything else is probably boring. Okay. So next principle we need to learn, the physics of Christ consciousness. Ultimately, naming is aspiration. Aspire to breathe. Ultimately, naming is aspiration to pure principle. Now, this is old Sufi. The name, the shape, and the service are one. So, for example, we're going to say that Christ is the name for an office, the title of an occupation of a political, body polis, body of bliss, domain, dominus vobiscum, God, domain. Okay, so you occupy the office of the Christ when you are the centripetal one. It's a name for a function in pure principle, far more than it could ever be the name of a person. That's boring and temporary, not fun. No, the pure principle. So we see the wave mechanics physics of the origin of alphabet as an example of this. That pure principle behind the physics of naming is, in fact, embeddability. So you've all seen our little animations, and we're going to play a few more of those little fun movies now. The spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet are letter shape. You say Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet into an audio spectrum analyzer correctly, and the lady who did it for us, Carolee Aber, she spoke the letters the way they do in Jerusalem on the radio at midnight. She said to me, very accurate, strong pronunciation of Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. And you look at those shapes of the letter as sound in spectrum analysis audio, and you see the picture of the letter in the audio waveform. That's called spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet, pioneered by Fred Wolf and Carlos Suarez, whom I knew. And the other aspect is the optical physics of this, the shadows of the donuts, the phase angle of toroids, in the physics, the symmetry groups nesting of string theory, are how atomic table is made and are the origin of alphabets, Hebrew and Sanskrit. Pictures below. So compare the 72 names of God to the tetracubic symmetry operations, and you get the idea. So naming is the process of embeddability. It's powerful, it's psychokinetic, it's cool. So divine immortal names are, in truth, pure principle inhabited. Hint, Christos, hence Yod He Vahe, Yahweh. The name, the shape, and the service are one. Eureka moments are, in truth, pure principle inhabited. That pure principle is charge distribution perfected. Literally, He Ave. He is the breath of charge takes flight, or heaven, He Ave. You know, any she can tell you that he is amorphous and space-filling. So maleness, if you look at Faber d'Olivet, Hebraic tongue restored, defining hey, as in Yod He Vahe, he says hey, which means five in Hebrew Yod He Vahe. He says, yes, it's amorphous and space-filling. Anywho, so this is, you've all seen these animations. This is the word Bereshith, the first word of Genesis, for example, which is the sequence of 7 turns of mind necessary to turn inside out on the surface of a torus. That's what Bereshith, the first word of Genesis, means. Faber d'Olivet translated at first in principle origin of thingness, which is literally non-destructive self-reentry, or the ability to turn inside out. Is that how electric fields become self-aware? Ooh. So we've all seen these animations, but you see that we took that self-organizing 7-color map, and if the inside of the torus is the right ratio to the outside, then the top-down view of that 7-color donut will be the golden mean spiral, which is how I did the math to animate the origin of Hebrew. And so we call this raised trace. You see R-A-Y there, and you see how turning inside. So when you meditate on the physics of non-destructive self-reentry, or turning inside out, and that is supposed to animate, you begin to think about how self-awareness occurred in electric fields by recursive turning inside out, non-destructive self-reentry, as it were. And so this was called the glass bead game because it's literally the tilt angle of recursive glass beads turning inside out. And there's this whole story about Yod-He Vav-He in that vortex, and that's the story we're about to tell. This is some of the math I did to animate the origin of Hebrew. We're not going to do all these animations. And so you see the relationship to Sanskrit. So on the top left, the tagan or crownlet in the Kabbalah, the study of the Hebrew letters, are merely the three arrows of the tetracube showing your relationship to the cubic axis, literally the prisoner. You're imprisoned in a cube here. So the tetracube, your relationship to the tetracubic symmetry is a tagan or crownlet to the arrows. Whereas in Sanskrit, you take the same shape of those letters here and you add a vertical and horizontal bar to indicate your relative relationship to the tetracube of embedding of the spiral within the torus, and you get Sanskrit. So these alphabets are examples of the ability to self-organize the names of God, literally, as the spiral rotates in the shadows of the tetrahedron's axes, 7 arrows of symmetry. And then in Sanskrit, then this becomes the index of the various sounds, guttural, palatal, cerebral, where it's literally an index of all possible audio plicatives. Again, about embedding, as in the word fetus, F-O-E, fertile fetus. Literally, the O and the E is where the donut turns inside out, which is the physics of the first move you ever made, how the egg responds to the capacitance of the arriving sperm is to implode and turn inside out, literally to dimple. And that's O-E. Do you see? Fetus is very fertile. So here, if I say, and we're going to be talking about Yahweh, Yod-He Vav-He, as an example of the pure principle of naming past the local problems when Enlil, the Draco, took the name Yahweh. That was a local wannabe. But the principle behind the naming of the office of the Yahweh is who can inhabit two opposing light cones, Yod and Va. Okay, here's the Yod. That's, you see that vortex in the spectrum analysis, the sound Yod, and we're going to have the Va here coming up in a minute. So this creates consumed perspective, as in when John Dee designed the Rose Island Tower in Rhode Island. So it literally created consumed perspective because you get this inverse mirror, and at the conjugate point where the inside is perceived from the outside, that is the magic point where vision turns inside out, the old ancient mirror principle. And that actually becomes where longitudinal wave becomes embedded, because opposing letters implode. And this is actually a relationship of small letters to capital letters. There's a whole science behind that. So anyway, so the name and the shape and the service are one. This is pure principle. So ultimately, the only sustainable result of naming things is to embed or grok or assume the position in the shape and pure principle as a wave mechanic. Once we begin to understand that the origin of symbol, the origin of alphabet, is pure symmetry, wave mechanics, then we can have a proper relationship with our names. Christos, for example. So, for example, me, in a million years, my name, Daniel, will still mean the L, the one who can make the immortalizing phase shift from transverse to longitudinal, image below, into the dream spell and through death, from An. So Daniel literally means the L from An. The An is the Anu, the principle of being a sun god, a star inhabitor. Note, for example, most all ancient religions are effectively sun god religions. So in a million years from now, Daniel will still mean the L from An, the phase shift that enables you to be a sun god. It won't mean me. That would be boring. No, it will name a pure principle, and that pure principle will live forever. And if I inhabit that pure principle, hello, I get the kind of eureka that's immortal. If I try to think my name locally, do I care if next year people remember? Hell no. Do I want to inhabit a sustainable wave that lasts forever? Yes, which means I must meditate on pure principle and not local personality worship. That's what I'm saying. So at that point, Daniel would not need to mean me. Thank goodness. Okay, that would be boring. So too, as we shall see, spiritual names are a title for an office, a function, like the Christ principle, the one principle behind crystallizing, how waves become shareable, the crystallizing principle of implosive compression that enables connectivity. That is the Christ principle. And we're also going to look at Yahweh, the name for who inhabits the double light cones, the double vortex, Yod and Va. We're going to see pictures. So this is the L as in the L from on. You've all seen this. This is the L or phase shift. So you enter transverse and you make an L or a phase shift from vertical to horizontal. And at the tip of the squirt gun, the wave becomes longitudinal or compressional. And the compressional component of an electromagnetic wave can go practically forever. The transverse component, it ain't immortal and thus boring. So just because current electromagnetic theory doesn't even know how to measure a longitudinal wave doesn't mean it's not interesting. No, it just means that current electrical engineers who don't understand coherent longitudinal interferometry, they're boring. That's all it means. So that is the L or the phase shift as in Elohim. And this is another example of the harmonic cascade, not just of the invention of Theraphi.net, which I discovered right here when I discovered the principles, the frequencies pre-reused from Lakhovsky and Rife, 310, 3280, were close to the pure principle of phase conjugation of Planck, which are right here, which are the frequencies then we used at Theraphi.net. Remember, Antoine Priori, the antecedent of Theraphi.net, did not know what phase conjugation was, did not even know he needed opposing tubes. He just tripped over some useful frequencies because he got them from Lakhovsky and Rife, and who by trial and error tripped over phase conjugation to Planck. So that is another example of L or phase shift. And you see at the compression point center, the red circle symbolizing Planck, length and time, that's where the propagation into the longitudinal array is enabled. Yeah, so here's Yahweh. Yod, He, Va, He. Here's two opposing light cones. Here's Yod, I pronounce it into a spectrum analyzer. And here's Va. Oh, is this Va here? No, that's Ayin. I don't have Va. Okay, well, you can see it. If you shape your mouth into, say, Yod, Yod, you made a cone going that way. When you do the opposite, you say Va, Va. Your mouth made a cone going in the opposite direction. So you're literally making two opposing light cones when you say Yod, He, Va, He, Yahweh. And this is a picture from the ancient Japanese Orion woodcut showing the two double vortex light cone of Orion. And we're about to see the physics of the Orion Stargate. And the guy who inhabits that double light cone is called a Yahweh. Now, when Enlil, who was half Draco, named himself Yahweh, really bad news. It doesn't mean he succeeded. It just means that he was a wannabe. But the principle behind the naming process, the office of those who steer the tornadoes, that's the empowering part. So here is the four-wave mixing tetracube of the physics of the Orion Stargate, which is actually opposing double vortex called four-wave mixing, and how lasers phase conjugate. And that's the biggest Stargate in the galaxy of Nataru. Listen to Elena Danan. She's right about so many of these things. And that was the subject of the Orion Wars. Who gets to steer the biggest Stargate around? But if you don't understand how Stargates work, then you don't even get to play the game. You're still in kindergarten. And this was called Peshmatan, the Way of the Nine by the Hopi. Long story, but that's the geometry of that cone. And oh, we just happen to have an animation. So your symmetry relationship between that 60-degree cone, solar system center, light cone, Pleiades, Sirius, Orion, 60-degree cone, implosion cone, and the big stargates over there, and pointing to it from here in Orion is the pyramids of Giza. I made these animations when I was young and ambitious. So, am I old and crotchety now? No comment, please. No. So this is actually when Jay Widener came up to me and he said, when we started Gaia TV, he said, well, we need a map of the Orion star map on the Giza Plateau with the golden mean spiral superposed. And this is what I did. You see the double light cones, Alnitak, Mintaka, the three belt stars of Orion, is actually, they call this the Antarian conversion. This is the geometric representation of the Orion Stargate, which Stargates are always where the wars start. So here's this, you make that same cone in your brain waves. Here's the Schumann harmonics in green. Here's the equation for Planck fire in blue. Here's the brainwave harmonics. And here is that implosion making that light cone. It's the same principle. And we talked about when the kids make those harmonics in their brain waves, and they begin to be able to see without their eyes. And in a high amplitude case, they begin to actually make teleportation possible. So closing in on this phase of our conversation, the Christ principle is a name for perfectly branched or fractal alchemy within the bloodline. Implode by fractal attraction to the Christ-all, the Christ principle, Christos. Examples. Thutmoses, sons of Thoth, is the name for Egypt's royal line. Thoth means Thoth, Tahuti. Moesis means the son of, or the lineage of. Thutmoses was the name for Egypt's royal line of kings, and the lineage of the Black Madonna and the Holy Grail, the Egyptian royal roots of the Essene Moses Jesus, the book Out of Egypt, House of the Messiah. So the line of David is actually Tehude, DWD, Tehuti. So everywhere we hear line of David, it means the children of Thoth. This guy gets around. So Thoth, Tehuti, Ningishita, and Elena Dadan says that actually when he came here to keep track of Troublesome Enlil, half Draco, with his brother Enki, who was Thoth's partner, his name at that time, Thoth Tehuti, was Ishka, whose function was the alchemy teacher. I like Elena Danan on this subject. The alchemy teacher, alchemy is only a name for charge collapse, right? Non-destructive compression, isotope transition. So this alchemy teacher, his logo was the caduceus, Hermes, which means phase conjugation, charge collapse, fractal, origin of life. You get the flavor. So the core electric principle of the divine, perfectly branched fractal mind, divine mind, we must understand how electric fields become toroidal, embedded. Charge fields become self-aware, mindful intelligence. This is the origin of the angelic and what we've been calling the divine. Examples, longitudinal coherence, field of ancestor memory and dreaming track song lines, part of Jenny's expertise, is quite specifically the God divine presence. God for the Aboriginals is the ancestor memory in those song lines. That is the divine. So ball lightning, also another example, responds well to telepathy. It's toroidal. It turns inside out, our friend George Edgley. Conjugate implosive plasma fields like Theraphi.net so frequently become like the family pet, puppy dog or kitty. Really, the plasma field, a well-situated Theraphi, the conditions of space, eventually the plasma field becomes like self-organizing. You don't even hardly need to turn it on. There's many stories of if it's in nature, it works really good. And so the kitty, I mean the plasma donut, doesn't sit in your lap and run its motor or purr if you have a bad attitude. No, but kitty does know where it hurts and how to purr there to heal you. This is a self-organizing plasma field, and it is a family pet. These are examples of plasma domains becoming self-aware. So hint, now study how angels are born. So how charged domains, dominus vobiscum, dominus means the domain, go with you. How charged domains become self-aware, mindful in terms of symmetry operations. The primary symmetry operation enabling charged fields, all of creation, to become self-aware or conscious is recursive turning inside out, literally implosion by fractal conjugating embedding. images below. That crystallizing Christos principle of successful non-destructive compression turning inside out results in the connection from the more local transverse EMF to the far more global longitudinal EMF array. Now here's where Tufan was going to hold up the 7-color donut, but instead I'm doing it because Tufan's at his mother's. So recursive non-destructive turning inside out is how plasma domains become self-aware. That's simply the point. And we give examples now that if you drop a toroidal ink drop into water, non-soluble, it will self-organize into 7 smaller spinning toroidal donuts at the phase angle of the 7 spins of the tetra, the 7 axes of the origin of heart muscle, for example, 5 spins, 7 spins. So this is an example of how toroidal domains, by recursively turning inside out, self-organize, self-sort, and embed. Many pictures of this. We're not going to do all those pictures. But notice when you say, I would turn myself inside out for you, darling, and we see the harmonic inclusiveness, which is the only definition of immune health and heart rate variability, also defines the physics of compassion, which is the physics of successful compression. When your heart turns inside out recursively, this is the very, very technical electrocardiogram book, When Time Breaks Down, the Origins of Cardiac Arrhythmia, which answers the question your 3-year-old asked when she said, where does my heartbeat come from? Well, here it is. This is the electrical origin of your heart's beat. It's right there. It's an imploding donut. Oh. And so when those harmonics becomes coherent, and every time it turns inside out one more time, you get another harmonic in the power spectrum. And that harmonic inclusiveness defines immune health in heart rate variability. So this is called non-destructive self-reentry. And if you ever studied the philosophy of the origin of self-awareness, you can tell the slides that are in French and English, we used them in the tours talk with Elena. So that 7 spins, 5 spins became the Ophanic sigil of truth. And you see that when you're studying the science of the origin of Ophanic alphabet, and therefore Ophanic interstellar living plasma angelics, which became the movie Stargate here. The letters in the Stargate are Ophanic, because that's steering the plasma donuts to the right symmetry domains to implode, turning inside out. So here's all of the beautiful, or some of the beautiful work on Ophanic from Darlene and Vincent, later translated by Teresa Burns, who will be speaking about this in our Science of Alchemy class in a couple weeks here at Fractal U. So that dodeca became the movie Contact and movie Stargate, because that implosion actually is how Stargates work. So the final segment of this presentation will be showing how this compression crystallizing in the propagation into the array, that Bliss process and Kundalini, is literally implosive compression, is largely the biophysics of human bliss and Kundalini. And we have slides about that. But I think before we do, I see I've been going about an hour, and I'm just going to stop this share a moment. Take a little breath here. And Tufan, do we have any fun questions so far, or should we talk?
Yeah, we do have some questions. Would you like to go over some of them?
Sure.
Okay, first one from Christoph Weigert asks, I recently got earthing, grounding tech, socks, and a mat. Definitely can feel effects from it. Thanks a lot. Now, I read there can be interactions with electromagnetic fields, so it's not recommended to use earthing blankets and sleep with it. Could Dan maybe comment on that?
Yeah, earthing is an interesting thing. First of all, earthing is profoundly necessary and correct and useful to survive bliss experience, remain grounded, to finalize the Theraphi plasma experience. People have intense Kundalini. Studying the nature of grounding, and the book Earthing is wonderful. I absolutely recommend. And I would mention, there is a huge difference in the quality of ground. Remember, all grounding for psychologists and electrical engineering is the same. It's access to charge distribution perfected. That's what grounding is, which by definition is access to a fractal, which, by the way, is the definition of how gravity gets stabilized. So access to the ground of Earth obviously depends on where you are. Now, if you're someplace in beautiful nature and you got a good ground rod and you're connecting to deep underground sacred rocks, wonderful. If you happen to be in the middle of a huge electrosmog polluted, metal infested city, it's a little trickier to get a magic ground. Like the ground rod itself goes through your building and gets hooked up with all kinds of electrosmog pollution on the way to ground. It ain't quite the same. So the nature of the ground is at issue, obviously. Now, I don't know if whoever invented cities has yet apologized, but I think they should. No, I'm joking. So it doesn't mean that you have to move out of the city immediately, or might not be a bad idea. But in the meantime, at least become aware of there are places where access to ground is beautiful, and there's some place where access to ground is very complicated in terms of access to a pure ground. So the ground rod that hooks to your grounding blanket, there are quite a few variables here, aren't there? And further to say that, when the Theraphi is on, you don't want to touch ground because that will short out the plasma field, actually. But then afterwards, you absolutely need access to ground to put you in phase lock reference to the grid. Remember, grounding means, you know how to take care of your wallet and how to survive. That's called being grounded. Well, that means you have a way to reference the local reality, which is ground. And functionally, that means any kind of shower, access to water, or especially sacred water or, living rivers is fabulous for this. So there's a whole study on the quality of ground. Now, electrical engineers will say you need to measure less than 4 ohms on your ground rod, but there's a little more to it called power spectra. For example, I was there the day the entire family was crying because all the cows just died, basically. And then they measured, and there are a huge amount of amperage growing down the ground rod of that farm the day after they hooked up the ground from the cable TV network, and all the cows died. Oh, that's called stray ground interference, and it's deathly. If you would like to have healthy dairy cows, you need to study stray ground currents, okay? So there's a whole thing about this is you don't want to put the poison pollution of your electrical grid back through the earth. You need a fourth wire back to the power plant so you don't stick all that poison back down into the earth. Well, so the grounding is a very colorful question. Anyway, so access to ground is good, and then we need to study the quality of ground. Conversation to be continued, but let's move to the next question.
Sure. This one is from Nicholas. What controls it is still kind of hard? You get dielectric with modulation for frequency mixing at golden ratio, but doing that in real world is sort of hard. Is that where the dielectric concrete idea comes in? Even with that, what proportions is it related to? Schumann? I guess all stationary charge in the area will respond to the form of that building, dielectric. Still, I don't know. I need to play with it.
Let me,
yeah.
Well, I was just saying, maybe we take the first part of the question first.
Okay. All right.
Well, just to say, dielectric constant is a name for how efficient the insulator is between the sandwich plates of a capacitor, literally charge distribution efficiency. That means high dielectric, usually natural material, makes a good house because your aura can capacitively breathe through it instead of being shorted out by metal. So high dielectric in that sense is useful because it means charge distribution efficiency. For example, my hemp blanket here, very high dielectric, and it feels good. Now, So super dielectric constant example is how you make a phase conjugate mirror, because it has to be very permissive. Barium, strontium, titanate, for example, magic mirrors. What proportion is related to the Schumann? Well, the Schumann harmonic cascade, it turns out, is almost exactly golden ratio series cascade tuned to Planck, and therefore implosive, therefore a phase conjugate pump wave, which in our next slideshow we'll see is how pyramids, called the Hummer, implode the phase conjugate Schumann cascade and make global wireless power, literally a gravity diode, because it feeds longitudinal coherence into the grid, gravity diode, which you can then pick up anywhere in the grid. And that's how global wireless power works. pyramidwirelesspower.com. Let's go on to the second part of that then, Tufan.
So the second part is, the question is low versus high frequency. The Earth nodes confuse me a bit. They have to be extremely low frequency, brought about by the environment dielectric shape. Those spots are so strong that's still wild to me how strong they are with little to no high voltage.
That's a very insightful question, actually, because it's very true. The Schumann harmonic cascade, dominant 8 hertz, actually 7.83 hertz, which is slightly tuned from Schumann from Planck tuning, which would be 7.29 hertz. That's the difference that pyramids are tuned to. But it's true, the Schumann cascade is electro-weak. So first, it is what you'd call infrasound, mostly sub-audible below 20 hertz, infrasound. 2, extremely low voltage. When Bob Beck took a big pen and created a bit of static electricity with his hair, with the metal end of his Bic pen, and then vibrated that at 8 hertz, and the entire room had a wave of bliss. If he had done that at high amperage, it would not have worked. Only low voltage works, low voltage and low amperage. Your body is tuned to look for extremely weak implosion, and that tunes you to the universe. Your biology knows if the 8 hertz arise at high voltage, it ain't the Earth singing. So biology will not have bliss. So biology needs a low voltage and a low frequency. The reason is the infrasound is very long wave. So we want to embed very long waves. Give you an example. We were measuring who were the best tree huggers. We had measured the low frequency of trees. Schumann get to predict which tree will survive. You can read about this at our life force measure, flameinmind.com/lifeforce. We were measuring which trees were getting Schumann harmonics. And then we measured which tree huggers could restore the low frequencies in trees. It's measurable, by the way. It's really fun. And guess what? Ooh, somebody's not muted here. Yeah, we should find. Please mute yourself if you're not muted.
AGGV. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, please. So just to finish the thought, the ones who were best able to hug trees and feel the long wave repeatedly were those who had studied sacrocranial pulse sacrocranial healing. You know, the sacrocranial practitioners feels the low frequency, very low, in your spine liquid pump and inserts their attention, increasing phase coherence inside the patient's low frequency sacrocranial. And therefore, because they could feel the low frequencies, they could insert their attention, increasing the coherence of the long wave low frequency. So yes, the Schumann sacred bliss pump wave is very low frequency and very low voltage.
And,
Okay.
Connected to this, doesn't low voltage mean lesser range of distribution from IVO?
Can you find out who is not muted?
That's AGGV. I just muted right now.
I did.
Okay.
I just did that. I did that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So because millions of years of Schumann harmonics were low voltage, therefore biology became attuned to it and able to manipulate it by responding only to low voltage. It was low frequency because access to the long wave. Remember, Surfers of the Zavuya by Argoyas, ride the long wave, Uncle Joe. The long wave is the lowest frequency. So to give you leverage over the biggest waveform, hint, the size of the planet, the velocity at which the speed of light bounces between the ionosphere and the Earth, around 8 hertz, a very long wave. So access to the long wave, the infrasound low frequency, gives you best leverage on the large self-aware structures like the Earth. So your phase relationship to the Earth means that the brainwave harmonics, the heart rate variability harmonics that create bliss are identical with the Schumann harmonics, because that's your relationship to the Earth mind. And all of those harmonic cascades that create that still point are precisely a phase conjugate pump wave named PlanckFire.com. The Schumann harmonics, the photosynthesis harmonics, are all golden ratio times Planck, because that implodes the connection to the longitudinal array. Next question.
Another one from Shannon. I am an educated person with several degrees. However, I do not have a physics nor science background. Will this information be broken down so that the average Joe may be able to make better sense of the complexities? I will do my own research on the websites as well, since I am new to them. Thank you for hearing me. I guess Shannon is referring to our next lecture.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tufan. What Tufan is saying is that Dan uses too many big words, and Tufan does better at being introductory and helping people get started. Remember, we've been putzing with these ideas for 30 years, but there's something very simple at core here, and that is that if you look at the wave shape of everything that became life and everything that became centripetal and negentropic, you find the same caduceus. And that caduceus, called phase conjugation, is golden mean ratio multiplied recursively times Planck, the musical key signature to every wave that physics has ever measured. Okay, so you take Planck, the musical key signature of the universe, and you multiply recursively by golden ratio, which is fractality perfected, and you get a wave shape called the caduceus, named PlanckFire.com, that creates all negentropic and centripetal forces. Ask any physicist if they know why anything is centripetal, and they will say no, because they don't know why objects fall to the ground. So suddenly, when you know the origin of what made anything centripetal and therefore negentropic, you then know the cause and origin of life, the cause and origin of gravity, and the cause and origin of consciousness, and the cause and origin of all negentropy. That is profound, and it is simple. I will not let anyone tell me that's complicated. You take the golden ratio and you stellate that, and you get a geometry, which I prove by equation is the geometry of hydrogen. All golden ratio stellations of dodecahedrons, the only possible 3D fractal. That is profound, but it is simple. It is proof of what most physicists already believe, that fractality, charge collapse, causes gravity and consciousness. And I've answered the question of what causes charge collapse, named PlanckFire.com, which I remind you, most physicists already agree is the cause of consciousness and gravity. They simply don't know the cause of charge collapse, implosion. That is the question I've answered. So yes, you think, well, gee, here I am, a 4-year-old, and somebody says I need to understand why objects fall to the ground, even if Einstein didn't? I'm saying yes. Okay.
So
Next
we will
question.
make it simpler next week. I'm going to have a class on what charge collapses and the physics of fractality. So we'll make it easier for the beginners.
I'm sorry if I wasn't sympathetic enough. Thank you.
No.
Go ahead.
Okay, next one from Nicholas again. Parts to the equation. 1, the frequency mixing. It's the other parts that I don't understand. Dielectric hold charge on their surface, and the electric field lines are mostly straight through that dielectric. In a building, for example, it would contain electric field lines through the walls. How and where does the body fit into filling that space? Is it like a filter where band pass is limited to golden ratio, the body then coupling really well to the building? Mentally makes sense, but seeing that all real time is kind of hard. It's very difficult to make the distance jump between electromagnetic to such sharp changes in consciousness experience. Using the charge manipulation devices and affecting polar molecules like water in the body makes sense. But that's more making sense in high voltage situations. What about Earth crossing lines? Those are powerful. How?
Again, a bit of a long question, but just to say, remember, where Earth magnetic lines cross, which we now know is a dodecaecosa Earth grid, it is proven by measurement that radioactive critical mass is reduced. Bruce Cathy. It is proven by measurement that telepathy is increased. That is our friend Korotkov. What that means is those are the longitudinal compression nodes. That recursive crossing constructively can only happen because of golden ratio, which is how the 12 great circle lines cross in a dodecaecosa. Perfected crossing is precisely the perfected constructive wave cross points in 3D is precisely the problem that golden ratio solves, which means the problem of non-destructive compression is solved at those cross points, which means at those nodes, you will measure the maximum harmonic inclusiveness, including Schumann harmonics. At those nodes, you will measure maximum telepathy. At those nodes, you will measure reduced nuclear critical mass, because obviously nuclear radiation is the opposite of compression, which is why implosive capacitors like the Ark of the Covenant was originally built to contain the nukes. Now, the way you're using the word dielectric is a little bit inappropriate, because dielectric here, remember, only means a material which is charge distribution permissive. It means nothing more. So within a superdielectric, you can get harmonic inclusiveness. That's true. However, the dielectric itself doesn't define what harmonics propagate. Golden ratio in relation to bandpass. Remember, bandpass means that it's a filter which limits what frequency spectra can pass. But golden ratio is the definition of maximum possible harmonic inclusiveness. In other words, you can get more harmonics squeezed into one place if you use golden ratio than anything else. The solution to compression is a solution to harmonic inclusiveness, therefore the solution to fractality, and by the way, the solution to immune health in heart rate variability harmonics. So is the body really coupling well to the building? Remember, first of all, most buildings, except ancient sacred temples, are made of the wrong material to even enable coupling with the building. So do not try Bliss sustained in ugly metal, aluminum, steel buildings with electrosmog, because you're imploding poison. You can do it for a little, but it's not sustainable. No, Luke Skywalker did it in a cave, raised the Jed. He didn't go to a metal building. Hell no. So if you want to embed and feel the building, my suggestion is don't try to fall in love with the building unless it's a sacred ancient temple made of high dielectric materials, because you're trying to implode in something that's not implodable. But in order to get centripetal inside any structure, that structure has to be charge distribution enabled. That's why ancient wooden or natural material buildings enable bliss and enable successful death. So embedding in the building is useful, but we need to understand what biologic architecture is in order to sustain building. In practice, it means that we have measured which building is harmonic inclusiveness, predicts in advance what building will cause a seed or a child to grow. That's been measured. Bioarchitects.net, the subject of Juan Schlosser's talk in a few weeks. So embedding in a building essentially is the definition of temple. And the definition of temple is not understood by almost any architect on the planet except bioarchitects.net, actually. So anyway, I carried on in response to a long question, but we had fun. Next question.
This one's from Denmark. If we enlarge the picture of the Orion Stargate, Tufan's caliper, which is the Planck Tuner, should line up on enlarged picture, right? Asks.
Well, remember that the current knowledge of the Orion Stargate is literally effectively a cube. It's actually called the cube. It's where the story of the black cube comes from. And a cube by itself is not a golden ratio cascade until it embeds in something bigger. Now, if we look at the golden spiral arms of the galaxy, and by the way, the most broken golden spiral arm of this galaxy is the Orion cluster. Why? My Reverend Mother teacher said, when you look up and you see the Orion arm is broken, is because we blew up those stars in the Orion Wars. So Orion itself probably is not a very good indicator of golden ratio embedding, because most of it got, well, a big chunk of it got blown up. If you see the Orion arm, we have those pictures. So it's called the trapezium in Orion, and it's essentially a cube, and that is how you build four-wave mixing. But it's only later when you see that embedded in something larger, which in this case, the spiral arms of this galaxy and many, if not most galaxies, are dominated by the golden ratio. And yes, in those cases, the dominant nodes of those spiral arms, if I am right, which is to say, the places of the largest masses, would be golden ratio times Planck, literally Planck fire, and fit the caliper. Another way of saying that, here's my prediction. I'm going to stick my neck out in the world of physics right now and say to you physicists who stupidly invented this word called dark matter because you did not have a clue where the extra gravity came from. And I'm saying to all you physicists on planet Earth right now, I'm daring you, if you measure the local fractality, and it is quantifiable, of the local masses, you will predict where the extra gravity shows up. Hello, Karatov quantified fractality in aura measurements, so you can quantify the local fractality in the stellar masses and predict in advance where there's going to be extra gravity. And then you won't need this stupid idea of dark matter. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Another one from Denmark. Was the water distilled, captured in rain, or from a spring the ink was dropped into? About the toroidal ink.
Yes, it was a German-Austrian who did that experiment. I think it was Lauterwasser. I'm not sure. And I don't know what water he used. The idea is, however, if you're studying vorticity and you very accurately drop a relatively non-soluble ink into a relatively charged water, and I don't know what water he used, then and only then will that self-organizing torus that you see when the ink drop falls into the water self-organize into 7 smaller toroidal donut spins indexed by the 7 axes of spin of the tetra. So that's the right question, and I don't know the answer, but it's a fun question. Thank you.
This one is from Holly. How does the healthy flow of CSF play into this? And therefore, how would something like craniosacral therapy play into this? I don't remember which context that she asked this into.
If you don't mind, that is my excuse to quickly play a few more slides right there. Okay, so here are the sacrocranial harmonics on the right. Do you see them? Thanks to Patrick Botti, okay? And this is the HRV harmonics and the sacrocranial harmonics. And this is cycles per minute in this column. Here is my equation here, and here are the brainwave harmonics here, and here are in the right is the sacrocranial harmonics. And they fall into this range here expressed, and I believe this is cycles per minute. So the point is that the low frequencies of the spine liquid pump literally make a phase conjugate pump wave and implode. And that's what goes up through the mouth of the spine liquid pump named the amygdala in the physics of Kundalini. That's exactly the point of the next section. So we're just saying that when you have Bliss process, that phase conjugate pump wave of implosion is how Kundalini and Bliss work. It specifically charge collapse. This is probably the most important slide of that series, which is how I intended to finish today's talk. It's good because my voice is running out and we're close to 9:30. But look here, it's so cool. In red, you have simple calculation, golden ratio times Planck. That's what's in red here. Simple, right? Okay, Planck fire. In green, you have literally the measured up ledger low frequencies of the spine liquid pump called the tidals. So this is the longest tidal, 1 per 100, 7.01 hertz. The mid tidal at 2.5 cycles per minute. And here is the most important frequency in the body and the blood called the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz. And here's my equation, 0.0959. The Mayer wave. And that's the most important frequency you can breathe at if you want bliss. Is that practical? 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, the Mayer wave breath, the keynote point of heart rate variability called the LF component of HRV. So, and this is the base rate. These are called the tidal frequencies of the spine. Remember, if the spine liquid is pumping, and these are the measured harmonics, then it is clinically impossible to be depressed per up ledger. Hello. And here's that Mayer wave right here. I think this is the LF component of heart rate variability right here. This should be labeled the Mayer wave here. There's, oh, I don't have the right picture of the Mayer wave graph. The LF, VHF, LF, and HF component. And this is more on the physics of Kundalini, and this is the corpus callosum turning inside out. And here's are the frequencies heard ringing in the ear of the ventricle liquids by Bliss meditators. Notice the relationship, golden ratio. And here is the physics of how the pyramid became a gravity diode by imploding that same low frequency cascade of the Schumann phase conjugate pump wave, and the pyramid implodes the Schumann cascade and dumps coherent longitudinal into the planet called pyramidwirelesspower.com. And here, this is the Agnihotra that's done at sunrise, specifically sunrise and sunset, specifically because there's the longitudinal. Isn't that cool? And there's the design of temple. Okay, I'm going to stop now because we're out of time. But thank you for giving me an excuse to play a few more slides. So yes, the spine liquid pump frequencies are precisely an implosive phase conjugate pump wave, literally planckfire.com. And that is the charge collapse physics of bliss. Absolutely.
Thank you, Dan. So before closing, maybe we should remind next week's lecture. I will be talking about the introduction to charge collapse in fractal fields, science of tuning to Planck, and we will make it easier for the beginners to understand the physics better. And yes, if you would like to conclude.
I just realized that my wild hair made me look like a mad scientist, so I tried to smooth it out a little bit, but oh well.
You look nice.
And sorry if I got too enthused, and sorry if I was not patient enough. But Tufan is right. He will make it more simply, hopefully, next week. But hopefully we have the point here, which is that naming things like the Christ principle and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh Yahweh is a process of embedding into a pure principle. And within that sense, then we can know very well what Christ consciousness is, which is literally to inhabit in and get centripetal in the array and be able to steer those tornadoes. And suddenly all this mystery of ancient religions and personality worship come into beautiful and simple perspective, which is that the nature of this array we call the spirit and collective unconscious and communion of saints is a very simple and direct, solid, predictable, measurable electrical engineering, which we call longitudinal EMF coherence in the array, formerly called scalar or torsion fields. And these compression waves, where they meet and bounce at these nodes, create the DNA radio to sacred space and telepathy, the best places to have bliss and have telepathy and talk to ancestors. It's actually very practical information. So we're very glad that you came here and partied with us tonight. I hope we did something helpful with the questions. They certainly were fun. Thank you there at Findhorn for joining us, Jane. I like the thumbs up. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to remove the pin here and say goodbye to everybody. And Dan,
Thank you.
Evo,
Bye
Michelle.
bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you next
Iana.
week.
Bye. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Bye bye, everyone.
You
Love
guys
you.
are
Smiles.
Bye.
Wonderful
Bye. Thank you
smiles.
very much.
It was nice.
This was really, really great.
We had fun. Come again soon.
Shareable wave.
Party next
Exactly.
Sunday. Party next Sunday.
Okay, good.
Aloha.
That
What a
was
blessing.
magnificent. Thank you so much for sharing. It was
What a
so deep
blessing.
and intense. Thank you.
You guys are a joy. Thanks for being with us.